This video is about doing exercise 12 composition. So there was a lot of material covered between the quiz video and then the secondary video that I posted. And you're going to have to go on today's page and get a few things. You'll get the compositional structures handout, you'll get a file, and of course you should look over the instructions because I'll go over most of them here, but you should still always read them. So when you download everything here, you'll have a file like this in Photoshop, and so you'll notice it's all these artboards set up, and so each artboard is presented in the layers like this, and you can open up an artboard to see what's inside each of these. And so I've given you each of these artboards has the letters HOA. And why do I have HOA in there? It's because I'm basically giving you a rectangle, a circle, and a triangle to work with to create compositions. And so let's look at the instruction sheet really quickly here. Is that you're going to be provided with these, and you're going to use the compositional rules to lay these three letters out. So I don't want you changing the typeface, weight, or style of any of these letters. Just leave them as is as far as those are concerned. But what I do want you to change, and based on when I tell you you can change them, is the grayscale value, the orientation, and the size. So we see here there's 4 of each 3 compositional things. So this is rule of thirds. These top 4 will all be rules of thirds. These middle 3 are all golden triangles, and these bottom 4 are Fibonacci spirals for you to use, and different layouts of these ones that I can move around. So in the first one, you're going to do size, placement, and orientation. The second one, you're going to explore size, placement, orientation, and value. Third, overlap, size, placement, orientation, and value. And fourth, crop, size, placement, orientation, and value, right? So you see these very specific things. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And so how are you going to go about doing that? That's where you should look at the compositional structure handout. And just to go over it really quick, the whole point of these compositional structures is to give us designers a way to make some decisions and try to do things like asymmetry and dynamic angles and things like that. Right, I've talked about them all already. But how do you actually use compositional structures? Well, each compositional structure has both some form of a line and intersection points where those lines meet. And so where you put things based on which compositional structure you're doing depends on what you have to place, and I'll come back to this one last. But if we look at things that we would place on lines, we have things like the central axis of an item. So wherever you think the kind of central axis line can be is something you might put on a line. You also have edges of objects. These are other things you could put on the lines. What you put on intersection points is usually the centrality of weights. If you have a group of things, right, you can kind of put the centrality of weight between the groups. When you have overlapping objects, the last video talked about chunking, right? So there's kind of a centrality of that chunked object based on its values and weights. Besides that, you have little areas of contrast and salient focal points, right? People, always the face is considered the focal point, right? So going back to our thing here, if I was going to place this on a rule of thirds, right? Well, obviously nothing's on a rule of thirds right now. We need things. So what's the center of the H? Probably, right about there, I would say, is maybe the center of the H. Just so you know, if you want to hide these lines on the rule of thirds, if you hit Command semicolon, you can kind of turn them on and off. Right? How am I selecting layers? I'm right-clicking on them, or actually I have a trackpad, so I'm 2-finger clicking on them, and you see that we have them there. If you wanted to, you can go here. Also, some of you may have it in auto select mode, and if you're in auto select mode, then you, with the tool, it will just grab the one you want to do. If you're having, I always leave that off because I inevitably grab the wrong thing, but you can always have auto select mode on. And so then here, right, with rule of thirds, maybe what I want to do is, it says to play with, play with size, right? So maybe I'll I would do something like this. You know, I want something with this A. So I think the A I might make kind of big. I don't want to crop it off the page though. So again, it's up to you. I'm not going to do one for you, but I'm trying to figure out how do I use the rule of thirds in an interesting way. Now the first one says not to crop it off, so that A is not going to work for me. Maybe I'd wind up leaving the A. It's not quite cropped off the page. Let's see if I can get this a little smaller. This one, right, we have it both in the center and on the access point. So maybe something like that creates a rule of thirds. Now that looks kind of boring, but that's okay because right now we're just kind of just making ourselves aware of these things. Obviously, you can make them a lot better than that, and I don't want to give you any answers or lead you on those. So each one is labeled size, placement, and orientation, right? So I could have very easily taken the A and, right, free transformed it and maybe put it this way, right? So I'm exploring these three variables. Now over here we have size, placement, and value. How do you change the value? It's as simple as going into your color and, right, changing, right, how valuable it is, right? Because now things that are lighter and smaller obviously have less pull to the eye. The last one, the middle one, is overlap, so we can do things like finally start overlapping things like that. Maybe even make one really big. We have also placement, orientation, and value to play with. And crop, when I say crop, this is the one where you can actually have something go off the page, right? So you're talking about something like this. That's crop, okay? So you see, whenever you have one, whenever you're on a certain artboard, it will automatically have those thirds lines on it. That's the way Photoshop works. But now once we go down to these ones, these are actually, I have the guides sitting in there locked for you. So if you just want to see it without them, you'd have to turn it off with the layer here, just if you wanted to kind of check it. But it's the same thing, right? The same variables you play with from left to right. Of course, right, these are the intersection lines. These are the lines there for that. The last one is the Fibonacci spiral. And just real quick, going back to this sheet, using this is kind of weird. I mean, there's different ways to use the Fibonacci spiral. Sometimes you will put gesture lines and edge lines on the lines. Sometimes you're winding up just using area to proportionally things. I will say that probably the most salient thing of a Fibonacci spiral is usually putting some kind of small salient focal point right in these small area, right? That's generally how you use one of these. So like I might put my H, might put my H right here, you know, and that would be where it places, and then figure out how to use the sweeping circle to you know, make the eye move in a Fibonacci spiral. So I might do something like this, take this A, take the A, you know, maybe put it right here, maybe even let the eye move a little bit, right? And if I want to see that without, you know, something like that. Do I love it? No. But really, you're just trying to make the movement. You're trying to create movement. You're thinking about what's the main focal point, right? So I think on this one, since I can play with orientation, you don't actually have to change the color. You could actually just use, since they're black on white, you can actually just use the opacity, which a quick tip is that if you actually use the numbers on your keypad, it will actually jump to that opacity, like 10, right? To, if you do it really fast, it'll like I typed 34 right there. It'll pick up on that. So you can always play with those things. So really this entire exercise is just about exploring these different variables, using these different shapes, using these compositional structures. So it behooves you to sit down and really read this compositional structures document and make sure you understand it. I mean, I went over it, but there's, you know, when you just really think about it really quickly, make sure you read the instructions, because our guiding principles of composition, right, are hierarchy, right? One element I should want to look at more than the other three elements. Movement, right, that's part of our compositional structures. We should be moving between then these elements on the page. And balance, right, we should be setting an all of these three compositional structures will help you create an asymmetrical balance. And so again, there's these four questions that are your guide. What is your main focal point? And obviously you should use contrast to create that and make something more salient in the visual hierarchy. Does your eye move from focal point to focal point? Likely always drawing your eye back to the same main focal point, right? Because as we move through things, we'll be creating triangles and diagonals and circles in the way we place things. Is your piece balanced yet asymmetrical, not imbalanced? And you activate negative space. And so that one's a little more complicated, but think about it. You're not just moving the spaces, the objects around, but as you move objects around, you're changing the shape of the negative spaces around them. And part of asymmetry is a way of invoking what's called active negative space rather than passive negative space. Because I have this here on this thing, and that's great, but kind of the space looked kind of yucky, right? So why I don't need to necessarily put that on the intersection point. I put that up on still just on the line, and maybe that feels a little better. Maybe I want to get that H. I know I put that there. Well, maybe I want to put this there, right? And now that's feeling a lot better to me. Don't love there's a little too much white space down here, so I might pull everything down slightly. But that's the kind of things that you're considering as we do that. And obviously here the A is our most salient thing in the hierarchy, and we've got this triangle that we go through, and we always wind up at the A because it's so much more salient in the hierarchy. So I hope you understand all that. Obviously, if you have any questions, shoot them over to me, and I'll likely answer them maybe even to the whole class so that we all kind of get the benefit of any of those.